LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the 100th episode of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out almost 30 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really good show for you tonight, I think. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And I also have a few political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, as well as a couple clips from the Late Show with Seth Meyers interview of Senator Ted Cruz earlier in the week. You can see the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Tonight's topics include that perennial favorite Islam and Muslim extremism, and that continuing debate on whether the blame for terrorism from Islamic extremism lies with Islam or extremism. I'll also have more clips on the issue of race, this week with protests over an unarmed black student ending up with 10 stitches over a questionable arrest at University of Virginia, plus a little on Attorney General nominee Loretta Lynch. And I'll also have a couple clips on the latest developments in Yemen civil war, as all U.S. forces are being withdrawn and 2 mosques have been attacked. And then I think I have 11 clips, most of any topic, on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reelection win and his conflict with the Obama administration, especially about his statements against a Palestinian State and against Arabs during the election. And finally, at the end, I'll have a quick clip on torture and why CIA Director John Brennan can't say if so-called enhanced interrogation techniques actually work. But first, I want to cover 2 quick related topics. First, the always important issue of climate change, with comments both from my California Governor Jerry Brown talking reasonably about the issue, and then Tea Party Texas Senator Ted Cruz unreasonably denying science. And then I'll have a little more about how Senator Ted Cruz scared a little girl in New Hampshire by saying the world is on fire. And he's also about to become the first Republican to officially announce he's running for president in 2016, which may be why he was appearing on the Late Show with Seth Meyers at the beginning of last week. After a clip talking about scaring that little girl that I'll show in a moment, Ted Cruz tried to obscure the facts about climate change in the clip I've picked out to start the show right here.
Your demo is trends very young.
I poll very well in the 3 to 6 demographic.
Now let's talk, my question more about the rhetoric of the world is on fire. Now first I got excited because I thought maybe you were coming around on global warming, but that's not the case, right? Because I think the world's on fire, literally. Hottest year on record, but you're not there, right?
You know, it's interesting you say that, as I just came back from New Hampshire where there's snow and ice everywhere. And my view actually is simple. Debates on this should follow science and should follow data. And many of the alarmists on global warming, they got a problem because the science doesn't back them up. And in particular, satellite data demonstrate for the last 17 years, there's been 0 warming, none whatsoever. It's why, you remember how it used to be called global warming? And then magically the theory changed to climate change?
Sure.
The reason is it wasn't warming, but the computer models still say it is, except the satellites show it's not.
So you trust satellites more than computers? Because I have DirecTV and I'd rather watch on my computer. Because when that thing goes out,
and you know, cables show that it's not warming either.
Okay, well there you go. You are...
So that all ended with a joke there, but along the way, Senator Ted Cruz said a couple false and or misleading things. First, I actually remember when global warming became climate change, and it was because a Republican spin master named Frank Luntz told Republicans to say climate change because it was less scary than global warming. And I put a link down below to a 2003 article in The Guardian that reports that story, so you can see that was false, that thing that Ted Cruz said about that. But then the whole thing about there being no warming in the last 17 years is also pretty misleading, and I have a link down below to a PolitiFact article explaining why, including this graph here that is included in that article. And if you can, I don't know how well you can see it, but there was a spike in global temperatures back in 1998 because of a strong El Nino that year, and then there's been something of a plateau since then as the long-term trend catches up with that spike from the short-term cause. But if you look at the graph, it's still really clear, the long-term trend. And so next I want to show my California Governor Jerry Brown responding to an edited down version of that Ted Cruz clip. It didn't include the whole thing about the 17 years, but just about him being on the side of science. And I really like Governor Jerry Brown's response on NBC's Meet the Press, talking to Chuck Todd this morning. And first they showed the clip that I'm not going to show from Late Show with Seth Meyers, and here was the response from Governor Jerry Brown.
That was Republican Senator Ted Cruz, a likely presidential candidate, saying what he said on climate change. What do you say, because you've dealt with some Republican skeptics in California on this?
I'll say what he said is absolutely false. Over 90% of the scientists who deal with climate are absolutely convinced that the human activity, the industrial activity, the generation of CO2, methane, oxides of nitrogen, all the rest of those greenhouse gases are building up in the atmosphere. They're heat trapping, and they're causing not just warm drought in California, but severe storms and cold in the East Coast. Right. So it's climate disruption of many different kinds. And that man betokens such a level of ignorance and a direct falsification of the existing scientific data. It's shocking, and I think that man has rendered himself absolutely unfit to be running for office.
Well,
I wish that were true. I mean, I wish that Ted Cruz had some allegiance to the truth and science and the facts and were disqualified from office if he didn't. And actually, one thing I liked about Governor Jerry Brown's responses on Meet the Press this morning is that even right in the middle of this big drought we're having here in California, he was really careful not to overstate the effect of climate change on that. As you can see, for example, in the one other answer I want to show from Meet the Press this morning, over here.
Well, I want to go back though. You're not, are your scientists not yet saying this drought is connected to climate change? Is that why you were hesitant?
Well, what I'm hesitant is to particularize a particular storm or absence of rain in a given week. You can't tie that into the buildup, unprecedented, of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases. We know there is some connection, and we know that this drought is just the kind of things that are absolutely inevitable in the coming years and decades. And it builds up slowly. That's the challenge. And it becomes irreversible. So you can't just sit around and engage in rhetoric because some of your donors and your constituents are saying, well, we want to make profit. The coal companies are not as important as the people of America and the people of the world. And I think this has to be almost at the level of a crusade to wake people up and take the steps intelligently, carefully, but nevertheless forcefully from this point going forward.
As you know,
You know, later in that interview, in a clip I'm not going to show, Governor Brown said that if he was 66 instead of 76, he'd be running for president this year. And those two clips I did show make me kind of wish that were true, and not just because I'm a fan of that Dead Kennedy song, California Uber Alles, but unfortunately the person in that argument who is running for president is Senator Ted Cruz. They say he's announcing within 24 hours of this broadcast, sometime on Monday in the United States. So I want to go back and show that incident in which Senator Ted Cruz scared that little girl by saying the world is on fire when he was in New Hampshire this week, and then how he responded to it over on The Late Show with Seth Meyers, which covered the whole incident over in this clip.
Yeah,
you could move.
That's true. That's true. You were in New Hampshire, and actually, so I know you're not technically campaigning yet. You're pre-campaigning, I guess we'd say. And you had a moment which shows what the campaign trail can be like. You put a scare into a 3-year-old through no fault of your own. But let's take a look at this clip because I did enjoy watching this.
And the Obama-Clinton foreign policy of leading from behind. The whole world's on fire. The world is on fire. Yes, your world is on fire.
So I think the important lesson there is you just realize kids are terrible with metaphors.
Well, it's interesting, though, the next line that occurs after that, and I said, but your mommy is here, and together we're going to put it out.
Right.
And you know, it's interesting, that exchange, because in the last 24 hours, there have been 50 media stories that say, Cruz terrifies little girl. And by the end of it, I was Freddy Krueger. I had the fingernails. I mean, It was terrible. Now, the funny thing is, it's not true. The little girl, actually, her mom, I just talked to her mom about a half hour ago. She went on the radio this morning because she was so upset at all these stories. And she said, my daughter was incredibly happy and, in fact, turned to me. And I said, look, Ted is going to put out the fire. And she said, he's a fireman?
Again, they're so bad with metaphors.
He's like Marshall on Paw Patrol.
Right.
And so when I talked to her mom this afternoon, her daughter Julia was in the background, and she said, Ted Cruz is on the phone. Who's Ted Cruz? And her daughter said, the fireman.
That's great. I think in the end, that girl's problem isn't anything more than her mother doesn't know what 3-year-olds like to do on a Saturday. Let's go watch a senator talk. I hope she got ice cream on the way there and the way home.
Although...
So that, I don't know, I guess Senator Ted Cruz did a fairly competent job of trying to turn around that incident into a positive, and he is a fairly good speaker, and he appeals to a certain segment of the Republican Party. You know, he's announcing his candidacy tomorrow, or it may have already happened if you're watching this as a recorded show, at Liberty University, which shows that he's trying to go for the evangelicals, not just the Tea Party conservatives. But I want to show sort of a rebuttal of some of that speech that scared the little girl. Was covered over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. Bill Maher talked about that incident, and he kind of joked about it. But then he talked about what Ted Cruz said about the Obama economy, and showed that that was kind of ridiculous, which I'll talk about after you see that clip. Over here.
A funny thing happened in New Hampshire this week. Ted Cruz was speaking to a group of supporters. I guess he's running for president. He hinted that he's going to announce it on Monday. And he scared the living crap out of a 3-year-old. Really, here's what he was saying this. These are his exact words. He said, the Obama economy is a disaster. Obamacare is a train wreck. And the Obama-Clinton foreign policy, the whole world is on fire. And the 3-year-old was like, what? The world is on fire? Because she's 3. She doesn't understand the concept of exaggerating threats to fleece gullible rubes. And, you know, I must say, first of all, I don't think you should bring your 3-year-old to a Ted Cruz rally. His target audience is 5-year-olds, so that's just wrong. You know, but... You know, I mean, there are statistics on how much the world is on fire, and Obama came back with them on Wednesday in Cleveland. He said, what are you talking about? The economy is a disaster. Unemployment was 10% 6 months into my term. Now it's 5.5. The Dow was under 8,000 when I took office. Now it's almost 18,000. GDP was minus 5.4%. Now it's 2.8%. The deficit was 9.8% of GDP. Now it's 2.2%. At what point? Okay. At what point? I mean, these are. No, I'm not saying it for a flash. These are facts. At what point do Republicans look foolish for being on the talking point
that doesn't fit the facts or whatever? I think I cut that off a little early there, but the facts definitely don't fit that Republican talking point, and that's a problem for them. And especially if the economy continues to improve, which isn't a certainty, because even though the U.S. economy is doing pretty well, there are some problems in Asia and Europe that might sort of tank the world economy, but we'll see how that goes. And if the economy isn't an issue, the last clip I want to show on this whole issue of the Republicans running for president is a Republican who I don't think is running for president, although he's the second highest ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. He's also from California, Kevin McCarthy. And I think he gave a preview of one of the things the Republicans will be talking about if they can't talk about the economy, which is the Hillary Clinton email scandal. Thankfully, this is the only clip on that I'm showing, even though it was such a big part of the show last week and the week before. But even though it didn't really live on in the shows, I think it's going to live on in the Republican primaries based on the talking points Kevin McCarthy has ready to tell Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning, talking about whether Hillary should turn over her server in this clip.
Do you think at this point that she may have done something illegal?
Well, Bob, I don't know. If you were Secretary of State, would you set up a server and put it in your own house and then ask your top aides only to use that and only use your attorney to determine what is that of the public or not? We have the federal act when it comes to how to use this. I think she brings a lot of doubt with her own use, but she has the ability to clear this up. She has a responsibility to tell the truth to the American public, and she can release them.
Well, is what you're saying is she was just trying to make sure she didn't leave a paper trail here for the decision she made on Benghazi and other things?
Well, she was there for 5 years. I think she started the process. I don't know of anybody else that, when they go into the federal government, creates a server in their own house. I just think American public have a right to the truth, and she knows the responsibility that she has. And going to a third party is fair. It's clear. We don't want any of the other emails. We don't want to go through them. Just give us the emails pertaining to Benghazi, and this could be forward to the American public.
So I think we're going to hear a lot of that over the next however long it's going to take till they nominate the Republican, and then from the Republican nominee, who hopefully won't be Ted Cruz. And but I think you'll be hearing those talking points over and over again as the Republican primaries grind on until, what is it, Iowa is 10 months away at this point, and New Hampshire a couple weeks after that. I think I have that about right, but we should be hearing about Hillary's emails for a long time because she didn't turn over her server, I guess. Although, if you look at my show last week and the week before that, I have a bunch of clips that I think if you watch them all, you'll come to the conclusion that she didn't really do anything illegal, and there's not really much to the scandal other than the fact that it brings up several themes from past Clinton scandals that, things about the Clintons that people don't like. It, is a way to get to those issues. But speaking of things that seem to come up over and over again, I want to turn to the next topic. So I've talked a lot about, I even called a perennial favorite at the beginning, about this issue of Islam and Muslim extremism, and this debate about whether the blame for terrorism from Islamic extremism lies with Islam or extremism. And I get a lot of people who don't really understand what I mean when I frame it that way. I've even had people say it's a false dichotomy because, of course they're Muslims, but I'm not saying they're not. I never say they're not Muslims, and I'll talk about that in a minute when that topic, or in a few minutes when that topic comes up. What I'm trying to say is there a problem with the religion of Islam? Is there a problem with what's in the Quran any more than, say, what's in the Jewish Bible or the Christian Bible? And, of course, Muslims believe in both the Jewish and the Christian Bible, so it's kind of cumulative. And as I've said before, they have a lot of peaceful, humanistic things in all of those books, and then there are militaristic, aggressive things that don't fit into the modern world in all those books. So first I want to show a clip from Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who has been a big critic of Islam, and she is confronted with her argument that Islam is not a religion of peace, that there is something inherently wrong in the book, even though there are all these peaceful Muslims who read the book and don't come to those conclusions. And here's how she deals with that in a debate they had over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, hosted by Martha Raddatz this week, talking to both her and to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and then to a Muslim reformer who I'll get to in a minute. But first, here's the Ayaan Hirsi Ali clip from this morning.
Let's start with you, Ayaan. Your argument is that it's foolish to insist, as our leaders habitually do, you write, that the violent acts of radical Islamists can be divorced from the religious ideals that inspire them. Islam Islam is not a religion of peace?
Islam unreformed today is not a religion of peace. And in the book, I make a distinction between, let's say, three sets of Muslims. There are the Medina Muslims, the Mecca Muslims, and the dissidents who want to reform. And the Medina Muslims are those Muslims who apply anything and everything that the Prophet Muhammad did after he emigrated to Medina, and they apply the Quran literally. So it's groups like ISIS, the Taliban, etc. But there's a huge group of Muslims, I think they are the largest number, who I call them Mecca Muslims, who are peace-loving and practice only the peaceful parts of their religion. And then there are those who want to reform the religion, the reformists or the heretics. And it's extremely important today for the Medina Muslims to lose. We want the dissidents to convince the Mecca Muslims, that large contingent of people, to reform their religion from within.
Should you really be the voice for that?
I think that
You're not a believer anymore.
All of us who are born into Islam, the minute we start to criticize a religion from within, we're labeled heretics, apostates, we're condemned to death. And I think change is not going to come from the clerics. Change is going to come from the heretics. That's why I'm speaking out.
So I thought that was an interesting response. She almost backtracked a little there, and I was especially pleased to see her saying that the vast majority of Muslims, who she talks about the Mecca Muslims being peaceful and the heretic reformers being peaceful, and it's only these Medina Muslims, the literal fundamentalist Muslims, who are the problem. And I haven't read her book, so I can't really comment on the specifics and whether she's really backtracking. But I also want to show a clip from the other person having that debate, who remains a Muslim believer, and said that she thought that Ayaan Hirsi Ali wasn't a good spokesman for reform because of some of the things she said about Islam not being a religion of peace and various other statements. This is, I think her name is Manal Omar, and she is, I guess, one of the leading Muslim reformers, though I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't watched the introduction to the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos debate that I'm going to show you the final clip from here.
But you're trying to make changes as well. You believe there should be some reform, Manal. Is she the right spokesperson for this?
Well, I think
her approach?
I think the authenticity of the message is very important. I think the challenge is if you've been on record attacking Islam or trying to marginalize those who have a voice believing in peaceful Islam, then it's very hard for you to be able to call on a reform of Islam. I think it's happening. I would actually argue that the very creation of Islam from day one was an act of revolution, trying to stop the oppression that was happening all across the Gulf region area. In fact, the first verse of the Quran is Iqra, is read. And I would argue that is civic participation, that is holding accountability. It is exactly not letting the clerics define your religion, but you as personal responsibility. I feel that once you are questioned, it will not be my first word was pray, cover, fast. It was read. And I think that that is a direct command from God in the Quran, which every Muslim really takes seriously in terms of initiating change.
Do you have an argument with that?
And of course, Ayaan Hirsi Ali did have an argument with that, but I'm not going to show the entire back and forth, although if you check out the clip, the link down in the video description to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, the entire episode is available, including that debate, which was interesting. I'm not going to show any more clips from that debate, but I have a couple more clips on this whole Islam debate. First, I want to show from Fox News Sunday. The only real guest they had on, other than their panel of pundits, was an extended interview with the director of the CIA, John Brennan. And I'm going to show a couple clips from that, one of which is on this topic, where Chris Wallace brought up the big Fox News topic of, why won't he call, radical Muslim extremists? And I've covered that, where I don't think there's any problem with calling, Muslim extremists, using the word Muslim, though I understand why the government of the United States doesn't want to do that, because it messes with some of our allies in our fight against ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, Islamic State, whatever you want to call it. And I think, well, here's John Brennan, director of the CIA, responding to Chris Wallace's confrontational questioning on that issue here.
Talked recently of the ideology, your word, that fuels ISIS. What is that ideology?
It is a very twisted, perverted interpretation of a religion that they purport to represent, but in no way do they represent. It's an ideology of violence. That's what it is. It is not a religious ideology.
Well, Islam is certainly a part of it, isn't it?
They purport to be Muslims, but as I said, the overwhelming majority of Muslims throughout the world roundly denounce and condemn what they're doing. And that's why we should not give them any type of religious legitimacy.
This gets to your refusal.
And it goes on from there. Like, I'm not going to show the entire back and forth on that, but I think you get the point there. And I do think, like I said, that there's nothing wrong with calling Muslim extremists, to not use the word. As I think a few weeks ago I showed a clip of Howard Dean trying to argue that you shouldn't even call them Muslim because it overly dignifies them. But I don't have any problem with that. But my problem, like I was saying earlier, when I was criticizing Ayaan Hirsi Ali, is to say that the problem is with the religion itself, because different people bring, their own, prejudices and cultural beliefs and background and family upbringing and all sorts of things. They bring their own stuff when they come to a religion, I think. And, religion can shape culture just like culture can shape religion, but you can't blame Islam for Muslim extremists when there are so many peaceful Muslims who read the same texts and don't come to that conclusion and don't have those actions. And it's not the fault of the religion any more than Jewish or Christian extremists are the fault of those texts, because there are good and bad things in both those texts. But I'm going to show a quick debate between, or not a debate really, an agreement with Bill Maher on HBO's Real Time last Friday, and his guest Bob Costas talking about this issue, where Bob Costas supports him in saying that they're Muslims, which is true, and then he makes this transition to the issue of race, which is the next topic I'm going to cover after you watch that transitional clip over here.
And I mentioned perspective, and in the monologue. And, slapping your woman around in Muslim countries is legal, if not mandatory. Don't you think political correctness is kind of out of hand, especially when the president says things like,
yes,
we can't use the phrase Islamic extremism, we can only say violent extremism?
Yeah, I applaud you. You and I have spoken about it privately. Right. You need people on the left to call this bullshit out, all right? And I'm glad to be back on HBO. Yeah. You can say bullshit, all right? Just as you need people on the right to call conservative bullshit out. There are legitimate conservative positions, okay? I often find myself saying, that's a good point that George Will made. That's a good point that Rich Lowry made. It may not be the entire thing. It's a conservative point, but there's some truth in it. The DOJ report, to listen to Fox News, the only thing that was in it was that Darren Wilson was justified in shooting Michael Brown. Fair enough. To listen to MSNBC, the only thing that was in it was that there was systemic racism in the Ferguson Police Department. Right. Also fair enough. And other places, Cleveland, we saw something in Fort Lauderdale just recently came out. We know that this is true to a certain extent across the country. But why can't people with common sense hold two truths in their head at the same time and realize that what we want here is common sense, rather than just my tribe and your tribe,
common sense
left and right.
is not common, unfortunately.
No,
not anymore.
And you know what you get?
Well, wait.
Now, I think there's something to what Bob Costa said there, but I think there's kind of a false equivalency between MSNBC and Fox News, even though they both have their point of view. The dishonesty and the failure to deal with certain facts, I think, is a lot more evident on Fox News, and I've shown that over many years, I think. And on the issue of race, sometimes there are media sources that recognize that race is an issue, and then Fox News tries to come along and tries to pretend that it's not an issue. And that is what I'm going to show in the next couple clips about this student at the University of Virginia who was arrested outside of a bar and roughed up by the police apparently. And first I'm going to show how ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos dealt with it this morning. This is a report from their, I think the reporter's name is Lindsay Davis, and I thought this was a fairly good report on what happened at UVA over this last week here.
Yo, his head is bleeding! Yo, his head is bleeding!
This morning, Virginia State Police actively investigating why 20-year-old UVA student Martese Johnson ended up bloodied and under arrest.
I got a UVA, racist!
Once again, sparking a national conversation about police brutality.
There are a lot of people at school here that were not surprised, wouldn't be surprised, the thought that it was racially motivated.
On UVA's campus Friday, a meeting between law enforcement and students turned contentious. Black students ultimately walking out in protest. Johnson was among them. One day after his arrest, Johnson, with 10 stitches in his head, stood by his attorney, who spoke out on his behalf.
The trauma from what the ABC officers did yesterday will stay with me forever.
His attorney says the trauma happened when Johnson was denied entrance to this popular pub and was then questioned by alcohol beverage control agents responsible for enforcing alcohol laws and combating underage drinking. He says Johnson never used a fake ID. The officers involved describe Johnson as belligerent. The owners of the bar say they disagree.
I didn't think he was intoxicated at all. He was very cordial.
Those officers have now been placed on administrative duties pending the outcome of a state investigation.
And we're going to get to the bottom of it, and someone's going to have to answer for it. But let's at least let the investigation run its course.
While not all students here are protesting,
I'm all for equality, but equality that's due process, not mob mentality, which is what I'm seeing here.
Many here say at a school where only 6% of the student body is black, race was likely a major factor.
So you don't think that if it had been a white student who was underage entering a pub, that he would have been arrested also?
I do not believe so. If he had been arrested, he would not have been assaulted.
For This Week, Lindsay Davis, ABC News, Charlottesville.
Now, like I said, I think that ABC report was fairly reasonable, and you notice how they actually had the owner of the bar on camera saying that this UVA student, Martese Johnson, I think his name is, that he was not acting belligerent, that he was not intoxicated. It's already come out that they took his blood alcohol content, and he wasn't drunk, and they talked about the 10 stitches, and later I'm going to show an interview with the police chief from that city, and he basically says that it looks troubling that there was excessive force. But over on Fox News, there was the show Media Buzz that Howard Kurtz, who used to be media critic for CNN, and I never really liked his show back then. He used to do Reliable Sources, which is now much better with Brian Stelter. Well, he does this Media Buzz show on Sundays, but I'm not going to take a clip from that. I'm going to take one from Friday when he was on Special Report, where he really tried to downplay the racial aspect and said, these kind of arrests are common according to bartenders who they don't name and don't show, and I think trying to downplay the whole racial aspect in a way that I think is not really honest over here. I'm not getting that clip to play, and I really want to get it to play, so let me see if I can re-import it really quickly here. Right here. And sorry for this little technical difficulty, but I believe I should be able to play it for you here.
There were 16 television crews rolling when 20-year-old Martese Johnson emerged yesterday, the aftermath of his arrest captured on cell phone video.
I go to UVA! I go to UVA! I go to UVA! Stop fighting!
Gruesome footage, but why is this a national story? Why does today's Washington Post say the arrest over a disputed ID puts Charlottesville at the center of a national debate over white police officers' treatment of black youths, since it was done by Virginia alcohol beverage control agents with no evidence that race was a factor? Why all the cable news coverage?
Racial tensions flare on a college campus after a student is arrested and bloodied.
Obviously, there's growing outrage on the campus on the use of force concerning the arrest of a 20-year-old honor student this week.
This is just an unfortunate example of this relationship between law enforcement agencies and young, unarmed black men.
But is it? Bartenders tell us such arrests are common in this college town, but the national media are casting this as a non-lethal version of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. Johnson's lawyer wouldn't answer reporters' questions after reading a statement on his client's behalf.
I'm shocked that my face was slammed into the brick pavement just across the street from where I attend school.
And Johnson himself brushed aside questions from Fox News as he marched today with other students.
And it goes on. It's not much better from there. But that last part was really unfair, I think, where they tried to question him and he wouldn't talk on camera when he has a pending charge against him, apparently. If I were his attorney, I would also tell him not to talk to the media until his charges are resolved. And what's really striking about the position of Fox News and Howard Kurtz on this, that it wasn't a racial issue and it's common and there's nothing to see here, is the way that they're actually way to the right of the chief of police in that town, who answered a couple questions after the report I showed from Lindsay Davis on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Then the guest host Martha Raddatz interviewed this chief of police, Tim Longo, I believe his name is, and here you can see he says the investigation is ongoing, but what he saw in the video was disturbing and a problem in a lot of ways. Well, I'll talk about it after you see here.
Chief, let me ask you this morning, do you believe those officers went too far from what you have seen?
You know, I think the Virginia State Police investigation will best answer that. I will tell you that what is depicted on video is unfortunate, it's tragic, it's certainly disturbing to me as a law enforcement official, and frankly, disturbing to this community. Look, this campus, these students, this community, this city has been through a lot in the past several months, and once again, here we are on a national stage over just an unfortunate event.
Well, the owner.
So it doesn't look like they're circling the wagons there at the police department. It sounds like they're pretty much admitting that there was a problem, and based on what the bar owner said, and there's also information I've seen that he wasn't even trying to use a fake ID. He had every right to be where he was when he got arrested, and he wasn't being belligerent, although the police report says he was belligerent. And 10 stitches in the face, that is unacceptable, and it's part of this pattern that I've been talking about for a long time through clips on my show, and I've also put a link down in the video description to my video I made about a month ago about whether the criminal justice system is racist or classist or both, and that follows up on the two books you can see, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander and Matt Taibbi's The Divide. Both talk about our unequal and racist criminal justice system. And that's the last question I'm going to show from Martha Raddatz's interview with this police chief, Tim Longo, where she talks to him about his interaction with the students, the protesting students, and the questions they asked about this pattern, and he said he basically didn't have a good answer, as you can see in this clip.
And Chief Longo, you talked to many students on Friday night in a meeting, a lot of black students, 100 black students from UVA, and they didn't seem satisfied with your answer to this question. Why has there been a pattern of escalation, especially on black bodies?
You know, it's a difficult question to answer. I think that's a national discussion that we need to have. You know, law enforcement depends so much on relationship with its citizens, and when any aspect of our citizenry feels threatened, feels that they're not being treated fairly, that disrupts my ability to have that relationship and carry out the function of what I call relational policing. So I think together we're going to try to figure out exactly the answer to that question, and I'm committed to this student body and to this community to continue to have that discussion. I did meet with the chapter president of the NAACP on Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, and then again on Friday we met. We've had an email exchange over the weekend, and I'm committed to continuing to work with the students.
So let me just...
So that sounds like a fairly reasonable police chief. Hopefully his rhetoric to the media is matched by the policies he implements. I have seen some police officials who know how to speak nicely to the press, but then what they do doesn't really match. So I wouldn't take that necessarily at face value, but it's at least an encouraging sign that he's saying the right things. And having covered the issue of race and this UVA student showing some good clips from ABC, and then that whole weird Fox News thing trying to downplay the issue of race, I do want to show one clip where I actually think the issue of race has been overplayed, and I actually end up disagreeing with Democratic Senator Dick Durbin and agreeing of all people with Republican Senator John McCain, who was over on CNN State of the Union talking to Gloria Borger, and I'll have a couple other clips from him later about Israel, and but this is actually about the nomination of Attorney General of Loretta Lynch to take over for Eric Holder, which has been held up for all sorts of political reasons. And Dick Durbin tried to claim it was a racial issue, which I think you don't need race as a reason if you're a Republican to hold up a Obama nominee or filibuster something from the Obama administration. And so it's a little overplayed, as I'll discuss after you see it here.
Also in the news this week, we have a fight in the United States Senate over the nomination of Loretta Lynch to be Attorney General. It's in limbo now. It's in procedural limbo. It's now part of an unrelated fight over abortion, and now there's an open brawl, I would have to say, on the Senate floor about whether the delay was racially motivated. Let's take a listen to what your colleague, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, said and have you talk about it.
Loretta Lynch, the first African-American woman nominated to be Attorney General, is asked to sit in the back of the bus when it comes to the Senate calendar. That is unfair. It's unjust.
Senator, it wasn't just Dick Durbin. The head of the Congressional Black Caucus joined him in saying that this delay was racially motivated. What's your response?
My response is that you can't erase history. These same Democrats, led by Senator Durbin, filibustered Janice Rogers Brown, first African-American to the seat on that court. On that court, they filibustered Miguel Estrada. This has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with trying to get legislation through which would prevent or help prevent this horrible issue of sexual trafficking that is going on. And also, I will add to that, I will not vote for her because she has said she would uphold the president's unconstitutional executive orders concerning immigration.
But what did you expect her to say? Senator, what did you expect her to say? You know, she's a nominee of the president.
Yeah,
she said that it was reasonable.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you expect the president's nominee for Attorney General to have looked into what the president did and then say it was reasonable? I mean...
Well, Gloria, I'm very quaint and old-fashioned. I expect people to tell the truth when they testify before a congressional committee when their nominations are there for senatorial approval. I expect her to tell the truth. And
well,
if the truth is that she supports it, then, and she calls them reasonable, then I cannot support her nomination because they are not constitutional.
So why not just have a...
Now, I did say I agreed with Senator John McCain about the racial issue being overblown, but then he blew it there at the end. I can't totally agree with everything he said, and I guess that's never going to happen because the president's executive action is not unconstitutional, and they're never going to get an attorney general nominee who is going to say that it's unconstitutional, because most lawyers, or I think lawyers at least on the left and nonpartisan lawyers, or except for some Republican ideologues, are going to tell you both, and that includes that judge, that federal judge, district court judge in Texas, that put some holds on it, but not for constitutional reasons, for administrative law reasons. And of course, there are going to be some back and forth in the courts, but the immigration law passed by Congress authorizes the executive branch to make these determinations and to categorize people this way. So that is a total red herring at the end. But I do agree with the racial issue also being red herring, or I don't know, is red the right color? You tell me. But I want to move on to the next couple issues are about what's going on in the Middle East. I have about 11 clips on the whole Israel issue and Benjamin Netanyahu's victory in the Israeli election. But before I get to those, I want to do a quick couple clips from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz, like I said, guest hosting, although the first clip is from their reporter Alex Marquardt, reporting from Tunisia, talking about what's going on in Yemen. There's breaking news in Yemen that the United States has now withdrawn all forces, all special forces. You know, we used to fly a lot of drones and against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We're not doing that anymore because we are out of Yemen, as is reported on ABC this morning over here.
Good morning, Martha. It's hard to see the situation in Yemen this morning as anything other than complete anarchy in a failed state, a complex web of warring factions that have pushed the U.S. out and created a vacuum that America's biggest enemies are now trying to fill. This weekend, Yemen's growing chaos forcing the U.S. to pull out completely. The State Department saying 100 military trainers and special operations forces have now left. Forces that had remained even after the U.S. Embassy closed last month, eliminating the American presence in a country the Obama administration considers vital for counterterrorism.
We continue to go after high-value targets inside of Yemen, and we will continue to maintain the pressure that's required to keep the American people safe.
But now the unrest in Yemen has reached a new low. The U.S.-backed president has fled the capital. Rebels from the Shiite Houthi tribe, supported by Iran and sworn enemies of the U.S., now in charge, and this morning taking over Yemen's third biggest city. Then, during Friday prayers, suicide attacks that struck two different Shiite mosques, more than 130 people killed. A Sunni jihadist group claiming links to ISIS warning, this is just the beginning.
It's unclear how much ISIS has actually been involved in these attacks, but I do think what is clear is that their ideology and their inspiration has impacted several of these attacks.
Yemen's spokesman in Washington tweeting, "I hate to say this, but I'm hearing the loud and clear beating of the drums of war." It was in Yemen that the USS Cole was attacked by al-Qaeda suicide bombers in 2000. 17 American sailors were killed. Then, in 2012, in an operation designed by the Yemen-based al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the so-called underwear bomber tried to bring down a plane with plastic explosives. Martha Raddatz later touring the school and apartment where he trained. And back here in Tunisia, the government overnight releasing new video of that attack on the National Museum that left at least 21 people dead. Tunisia's president saying this morning a third gunman was involved, but he escaped. That attack, like the ones in Yemen, evidence of ISIS trying to expand their global reach.
So that's kind of a disturbing report about how, because I guess Tunisia was one of the semi-success stories in the Arab Spring. I don't know if Yemen ever really counted, but they're not that successful now. I don't know what's going on in Tunisia exactly. Just because there have been a couple terrorist attacks doesn't mean that the whole country is going under, like the civil war that seems to be going on in Yemen. And the second clip I want to show comes from right after that on This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning. Martha Raddatz had on the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, talking about what's the latest going on in Yemen over in this clip.
Mr. Chairman, I want to go back to Yemen and the dangers there. Can you tell us what the latest intelligence on that situation is?
Well, I think the problem is we're not going to have any intelligence in Yemen. Yemen's one of the most dangerous spots in the world. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is the largest external operation force within Al-Qaeda. They are responsible for, as you saw in your broadcast, the underwear bomber. 5 plots against the West in the last several years. They were tied to the Khorasan group in Syria to make bombs to blow up airplanes. Now that we pulled our embassy out and our special operations.
And that became because of the chaos. They've taken over the 3rd largest city. The Houthi rebels are everywhere.
Precisely. And now, because we are withdrawing completely, we will have no intelligence footprint or capabilities to monitor what AQAP and ISIS and the Shia militants are doing in the region. And without good intelligence stopped plots against the homeland, without that intelligence, we cannot effectively stop it. That's what I'm most concerned about.
This is.
So, again, it doesn't seem like good news what's going on in Yemen, although there's weird, different effects of these kinds of revolutions or chaos, or because the new force that's taken control is a Shia Iranian-backed force. The Houthis may actually have a stronger ability to put down the Sunni Al-Qaeda people, the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They are actually enemies with the Shiite Houthis that are backed by Iran. And then, of course, these latest mosque attacks in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, ISIS claimed responsibility, and ISIS also doesn't get along with AQAP. They apparently also fight, so who knows? It's all really complicated, and I don't think that what Representative Mike McCall there shed much light on it, other than to make us all be afraid about the threat to Homeland Security. And speaking of being afraid, I want to cover the re-election of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, which he accomplished by, among other things, claiming right before the election that he would no longer allow a Palestinian state. He was no longer for the two-state solution that he adopted back in 2009 and has been, U.S. policy for, I don't know, going back to like the Reagan administration maybe. Anyway, he said that, and then apparently right after the election he kind of flip-flopped on it, and Bill Maher covered that in his monologue. In a quick joke I wanted to show to begin the topic of the Israeli election and U.S.-Israeli relations over here.
News out of there this week. Shocking election in Israel. You saw that? Netanyahu was returned to power, and the day before the election, he said, there will never be a Palestinian state on my watch. And the day after the election, he said, I'd like to see a two-state solution. It was such an amazing 180. Mitt Romney went, wow, that guy's good. That is a...
Well, I guess it's good that Mitt Romney is the stereotypical flip-flopper. It's not John Kerry. He's Secretary of State now. 2004, wasn't that like the big label that stuck on him? But that was the joke coverage of the Israeli election. Now I want to show a more serious news coverage of it. This is a summary from Chuck Todd, including some good clips. There's a clip from Bibi Netanyahu talking to Andrea Mitchell, and then from President Obama basically talking about the election and the conflict with the Obama administration over here.
Relationship. We all know that in a tough election, things get said in the heat of the moment. And Benjamin Netanyahu's warning high turnout from Arab voters would benefit the left, and his ruling out a Palestinian state probably helped him win another term in office. But he may have incurred a heavy cost, provoking outrage from the Obama administration. And though Prime Minister Netanyahu has attempted to walk back his comments, it seems the damage, at least with President Obama, has already been done.
I don't want a one-state solution. I want a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution, but for that, circumstances have to change.
That was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to NBC's Andrea Mitchell, trying to temper an election he promised that there would be no Palestinian state while he was Prime Minister.
I haven't changed my policy. What has changed is the reality.
The U.S. is not buying the walkback.
We can't just, in perpetuity, maintain the status quo, expand settlements. That's not a recipe for stability in the region.
Is there any reason at this point to believe that he's serious about a Palestinian state?
We take him at his word when he said that it wouldn't happen during his prime ministership. And so that's why we've got to evaluate what other options are available.
The White House has hinted that the U.S. could stop protecting Israel at the United Nations, perhaps even drafting a new Security Council resolution outlining the framework for a Palestinian state. The two-state solution has been the framework for U.S. policy for the last 2 decades, and even accepted 5 years ago by Netanyahu himself in a speech at Bar Ilan University.
In my vision of peace, in this small land of ours, 2 free peoples live side by side in amity and mutual respect. Each will have its own flag, its own national anthem, and its own government.
Now the White House warns that Netanyahu's right turn, including his Election Day message to supporters that Israeli Arabs were coming out in droves, means that everything except U.S. security assistance to Israel is on the table. An effort to apply leverage to a new Israeli government, and a warning that the U.S. may no longer stand between Israel and the rest of the world at the United Nations.
So, like I said, I thought that was a good summary from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press of sort of the flip-flopping of Benjamin Netanyahu and the conflict with the Obama administration. But if you want to see a live defense of the Netanyahu administration from their ambassador to the United States, Chuck Todd also had on that ambassador, Ron Dermer, who tried to explain, square the circle between the one state and the two state, and basically blamed it on Hamas and other things that I'll discuss after you see that clip over here.
Good to be with you. Let me start with asking you a simple question. What is the position of the Netanyahu government on the peace process and a two-state solution?
The same as it was when Prime Minister Netanyahu gave his speech at Bar Ilan University. He is committed to a vision of peace, of 2 states for 2 peoples, a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state of Israel. What has changed is the circumstances over the last few years. You just talked about with Andrea what is happening in the region and the collapse of all these states in the Middle East, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria. We have a collapse of a 100-year order in the Middle East, and militant Islam is charging into the void. That's the first thing to change. The second thing to change, which very few people have talked about over the last couple of days, is that a year ago, 10 months ago, the leader of the Palestinian Authority reached out to a terror organization and forged an alliance with Hamas. Hamas is committed to Israel's destruction. Their charter calls for the murders of Jews worldwide. They fire thousands of rockets at Israel. And what Israel believes has to happen now is that President Abbas has to break his alliance with Hamas and return to peace negotiations with Israel. If that happens and we can solve the problem of Israel's legitimate security needs, then we can get back to the peace table.
So you'll deal with Abbas. The Netanyahu government will deal with Abbas, even if he's not speaking for the entire Palestinian people, because that had been one of the critiques before, that, well, he only really runs the West Bank, Hamas runs Gaza. You can't negotiate this just with one
That
party.
was not the Prime Minister's critique. The Prime Minister has been negotiating with President Abbas.
Okay.
He was willing to do it until a year ago when Abbas made this deal. Why did the peace process collapse? Because President Abbas joined up with Hamas. You can't join up with a terror organization. Our concern, Chuck, is that a Palestinian state today would be a Palestinian terror state. So the Prime Minister is not against a demilitarized Palestinian state. He's not against, and he hasn't retracted in any way his vision that he laid out at Bar Ilan University 6 years ago in 2009. What he's against is establishing a terror state on the West Bank, which would create not another Gaza, but 20 Gaza.
So you can see the way the Israeli ambassador tries to justify the switcheroo from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to claim that they're in favor of a Palestinian state as long as it's a demilitarized Palestinian state. And right now, with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas allying himself with Hamas, that's not demilitarized. That's the Hamas faction in Gaza that's been sending missiles into Israel. And I want to show the response from the permanent Palestinian observer at the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, who talks about how there's sort of this catch-22, and that it is that what Ambassador Ron Dermer there said about Benjamin Netanyahu not switching positions on whether he would negotiate with just the Palestinian Authority without Hamas, because that's not the whole Palestinian people. And anyway, here's his response in this clip.
Of the Palestinian people. So those who are punishing us for doing so, what message are they giving us?
Okay.
The message that they're giving us: go and fight, and we don't want to fight.
Well,
we don't want to be like other states around us.
If you don't want to do that, then are you going to renounce your partnership with Hamas?
Well, this is another issue, and I am glad that you posed the question. When we were divided, it is not true that it was not the policy of the Prime Minister Netanyahu. I heard with my own ears the ambassador of Israel in the United Nations, who was speaking on behalf of Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying in the Security Council debates, how can we negotiate with Mahmoud Abbas when he doesn't represent all the Palestinians?
But will you renounce
So
Hamas?
when we were divided, they did not want to negotiate with us. When we are united, they don't want to negotiate with us. And by the way, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu who negotiated with Hamas a ceasefire during the Second War with Gaza, and it was him who negotiated with Hamas the release of prisoners.
So that means the answer is no.
Why is it legitimate for him to negotiate with Hamas, and it is not legitimate for us to put our house in order?
All right.
And so, yeah, that's the Palestinian representative at the United Nations giving his version of why they have to ally with Hamas, and claiming that Benjamin Netanyahu negotiates with Hamas but wouldn't negotiate with the Palestinian Authority when they weren't speaking for the Hamas wing as well as the West Bank, the Fatah wing. And so the next clip I want to show is actually also from Riyad Mansour, where Chuck Todd confronts him with the charge from Ambassador Ron Dermer that the Palestinians won't recognize the Jewish state, and he says they'll recognize the state, just not the Jewish part of the state. You can see him talk about that, and then also talk about what may happen in the United Nations, which is probably more important, as I'll discuss after you watch that clip here.
Meet the press. And Mr. Mansour, let me ask something just right off the bat about recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. Will you be able to say that the Palestinian people, and can you say this on your behalf, that you recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
Well, we were asked to recognize the state of Israel, and we have done that on the lawn of the White House.
Not as a Jewish state.
Well, this is a new condition that Israel added. Israel can characterize itself as they wish, but that they cannot demand from us things and impose conditions on us. We belong to this land. We have a long history in that land, but yet in the same time, we accepted to have two states on that land. One exists, the other one is struggling for its independence so that we can actualize the objective of a two-state solution. Now, the Israeli election and the statements of Prime Minister Netanyahu are putting obstacles in the process of doing so. And if we do not move seriously in the direction of a two-state solution now, and as he suggests, to wait, then there will never be a two-state solution. There will be a one-state solution. And if we have a one-state solution, the majority will be Palestinian Arabs, the minority will be Jewish. And it will not be democratic if they want to impose on us an apartheid system. It did not work in South Africa. I don't think it will be working in our region.
Do you really?
Therefore, I think that we have a collective responsibility, all of us in the international community, including the United States of America, is to legislate in the Security Council the parameters on the two-state solution, to defend that plan. And if Prime Minister Netanyahu is genuinely committed and reversed his position again to a two-state solution, then he should be in favor of this resolution adopted by the Security Council. And not only that it will set the basis of a two-state solution, but also it would say that it should happen in a short period of time, and we should have a mechanism, collective mechanism, to accomplish that objective.
Well, as
and like I said, that part at the end is actually more important, may bode or forebode, or I don't know, depending on your point of view as to whether it's something that you think is foreboding, or is just something that's probably going to happen. But because of the conflict between the Obama administration and the Netanyahu administration, it seems like the Obama administration may no longer protect Israel at the United Nations, and because the U.S. on the Security Council often uses the veto to stop resolutions that are hurtful in some way to Israel. And what this may really mean is that the U.S. will possibly participate in the creation of some UN resolution that sets the framework for a Palestinian state. That was in that report I showed from Chuck Todd back there near the beginning of this subject. And I want to show a clip now from Senator John McCain over on CNN's State of the Union talking to Gloria Borger, where she asked him about that possibility. And as you might expect, he's against it, and he's going to do something to stop it, which I'll discuss after you see that clip here.
ISIS. The president has his priorities so screwed up that it's unbelievable.
Well, he's also apparently considering signing a UN resolution calling for a Palestinian state. What would be your reaction if he did that? And should he even be considering that?
Of course he shouldn't be considering it. And second of all, if he does that, then it would be approved by the UN, then the United States Congress would have to examine our funding for the United Nations. It would be a violation because the president's anger over a statement by the Prime Minister of Israel. It would contradict American policy for the last at least 10 presidents of the United States.
Several Republicans, including Senator John McCain, have said that they would consider defunding the United Nations if it does, if the Obama administration goes ahead with the Palestinian State framework of the Security Council. And others have said I think it might have been Lindsey Graham said that he would defund the United Nations if they voted to remove sanctions on Iran without coming to Congress first. So the Republicans always want to defund the United Nations. I'm not exactly sure why they hate the United Nations so much, but the next clip I want to show was also from Senator John McCain, where Gloria Borger, this is actually, I think, earlier in the interview, asked him about this conflict between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Obama, and the things that Netanyahu said during the Israeli election. You saw it was not just the part about not being for a Palestinian state and a two-state solution anymore. He also tried to get his base out by saying that there were Arabs were coming out in droves to support the left. It was kind of the Israeli version of playing the race card, but Senator John McCain just said, well, you can't hold people accountable for what they say in elections. Apparently that's something you can say on TV now, I guess, to justify things, as you can see among other justifications he makes. And he also claims the president is throwing a temper tantrum, and Iran is too scary and ISIS is too scary to really concentrate on all this so much. But anyway, here it is.
With us this morning, the president says he's reevaluating. He clearly was unhappy with what Bibi Netanyahu said about the Palestinian state during his campaign. Let me play for you something the president said to the Huffington Post.
His word when he said that it wouldn't happen during his prime ministership. And so that's why we've got to evaluate what other options are available to make sure that we don't see a chaotic situation in the region.
Senator, are we at a dangerous point here in relations between U.S. and Israel?
Well, I think that's up to the President of the United States. Look, there was a free and fair democratic election, the only nation in the region that will have such a thing. The President should get over it. Get over your temper tantrum, Mr. President. It's time that we work together with our Israeli friends and try to stem this tide of ISIS and Iranian movement throughout the region, which is threatening the very fabric of the region. The least of your problems is what Bibi Netanyahu said during an election campaign. If every politician were held to everything they say in a political campaign, obviously that would be a topic of long discussion. But the point is the JV, as the president described them, is just moving over into Yemen. We see this horrible situation in Libya. We see ISIS everywhere in the world. We see the Iranians now backing the Shia militias into Crete, where they're gonna massacre a number of Sunnis. And it is the guy in charge is a guy named Soleimani who imported, excuse me, I'll catch up here. Soleimani moved thousands of copper-tipped IEDs into Iraq and killed hundreds of American soldiers and Marines. And the President of the United States is praising the mullahs and their behavior in the region. This is one of the more Orwellian situations I have ever observed.
Now, I wasn't sure what he meant by Orwellian at the end there. When I first saw that, I was thinking, I don't know if that word means what he thinks it means, because I was trying to think of what was Orwellian about that. And then I was thinking, well, maybe he's talking about how we're praising the enemy and it's like we're at war with East Asia, not Eurasia, or something like that. You can tell me down in the comment section if that made more sense to you. That's like the third time I watched it, and I'm not sure how the word Orwellian applies. But I do want to show, if you think that was the worst of the Republican rhetoric, the temper tantrum and the justification for the flip-flops from Netanyahu is, you can't be held accountable for what you say during an election as something a politician uses as a justification. That's a little disturbing, although certainly not surprising, I guess. But the Republican rhetoric actually sunk a lot lower than that on this issue when Iowa Republican Congressperson Steve King, who I've shown several clips over the months on immigration where he said really anti-immigrant things. He said that whole thing about how they're not valid, the dreamers, the immigrants brought here as kids, they're not valedictorian. For every valedictorian, there's 100 with calves the size of cantaloupes from toting 75-pound bales of marijuana across the border. Or I'm paraphrasing, but the calves the size of cantaloupes. That's not paraphrasing. Anyway, this is Steve King brought his rhetoric into the whole Israel discussion, basically saying that Jews who were Democrats were betraying their religion, I guess. As you can see, this isn't Steve King, it's Democrat Steve Israel, Jewish Democrat Steve Israel, taking offense at what Republican Steve King said, talking to Gloria Borger on CNN State of the Union this morning over here.
With us this morning, the president says the split between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu prompted Republican Congressman Steve King to say this on Friday to Boston Herald Radio.
Here's what I don't understand. I don't understand how Jews in America can be Democrats first and Jewish second, and support Israel along the line of just following their president.
And with us is Democratic Congressman Steve Israel, a member of the House leadership who took great personal offense to what King said. Congressman, I want to read to you something you tweeted. You said, and I quote, "I don't need Congressman Steve King questioning my religion or my politics. I demand an apology from him and repudiation from the GOP." Have you gotten either, Congressman?
Still waiting, Gloria. Look, I lean to the right on U.S.-Israeli relations. I'm a staunch hawk on those issues. I escorted Bibi Netanyahu into the chamber and out of the chamber. And I really do not need lessons from people like Steve King on what it is to be Jewish or a Democrat. Steve King, who said that America is a Christian nation, should not be lecturing Jews about how we should be Jewish. Steve King doesn't know what chutzpah is, but Steve King lecturing Jews about how we, defining Jews and talking about how we can't be Democrats or Jews and Jews at the same time, That's chutzpah.
Well, there is another.
That's chutzpah, I guess. That was a pretty good clip from Representative Steve Israel, but I have a better one coming up in just a minute. But before I get to it, I want to show a clip of a Republican, also on CNN State of the Union. Gloria Borger tried to get Republican Adam Kinzinger to defend what Republican Steve King said about Jews not being able to really be Democrats and be Jews, and Kinzinger wouldn't take the bait and actually referred to the fact that Steve King had said several other ridiculous things over in this clip.
But it was your colleague Steve King who sort of said, raised the question of whether American Jews are.
I can never defend what Steve King says, and especially in this case. But, look, I think it's very obvious that we can have, folks in our parties that say different things on both sides. But it's a united Republican and Democrat on the issue of Israel.
And,
And, that's what's so silly about this whole partisan break with Benjamin Netanyahu is that there is so little distance between the Republican position on Israel and the Democratic position. I mean, they're both really strong supporters. And, I mean, it's basically, are you pro-Israel or really, really pro-Israel? Or somewhere in between pro-Israel and really, really pro-Israel. That's like the spectrum amongst elected politicians, with a few exceptions in the United States for a variety of reasons. I won't go into at this point, but I do want to show one more clip from Representative Steve Israel. He actually starts off talking about how there's bipartisan support for Israel. Like during the last Gaza conflict, there was all this money for an increase in Iron Dome, which Israel used to stop the Hamas rockets coming from Gaza. And then he actually makes a kind of funny analogy with the call from President Obama to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to congratulate him for his victory over in this clip.
The fact of the matter is, in Congress, there's no erosion of support. Every Democrat except for 4 supported Iron Dome funding. Every Republican except for 4 supported Iron Dome funding. And I don't see that erosion anywhere else throughout the country. Have there been flashpoints between the United States and Israel in the past? Show me a president since Harry Truman. I'll show you those flashpoints. What counts and what we need to do is get back to the fundamentals and stop thinking about the drama. There's all this drama now about, the president waited 2 days to call Bibi Netanyahu.
Yep.
It reminds me of my Jewish mother in Phoenix, Arizona saying, you had to wait 2 days to call me? Who cares whether it's 2 days, 1 day? What counts is, are we supporting Israel, providing them with the security they need? And on that, it does Israel no service for Republicans to make it a partisan football, and it does Israel no service for us to get caught up in the hype and the drama of personalities. What counts is the policy.
Okay, thanks so much, Congressman Steve Israel, and always call your mother, of course.
Yeah, I like the Jewish mother analogy there from the Jewish member of Congress talking about the Prime Minister of Israel. You can't really beat that for your political or your unintended political comedy, not from one of the political comedy shows. And I do want to show one more clip on Israel. This is from the Fox News Sunday interview with CIA Director John Brennan. Chris Wallace wanted to use what Benjamin Netanyahu said in his speech to the U.S. Congress about not trusting Iran and trying to get the director of the CIA to back up what Benjamin Netanyahu said, but actually he backed up his boss in the Obama administration over in this clip.
On the other hand, if there is a deal, the big question is, can we verify that Iran is living up to that deal? Here's what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told Congress.
Iran not only defies inspectors, it also plays a pretty good game of hide and cheat with them.
Question, how confident are you that between the new inspections regime under the agreement and your intelligence in the area, that you would be able to ensure that Iran was not secretly building a nuclear weapon?
It's not a question of trusting the Iranians on this. And I know that Secretary Kerry and President Obama are comfortable with what it is that we are insisting on as far as that verification regime.
But frankly, our track record when it comes to Iran and its nuclear program is not good. Iranian opposition groups in 2002 were the ones that revealed that the regime had secret facilities at Natanz and Iraq. One of your predecessors, Michael Hayden, says that they had done a lot of work at Fordo before we knew about it. Fact is, they've fooled us repeatedly, the Iranians.
And I think we've gone to school on some of those developments over the last decade or so that we can now have a better plan and opportunity to verify some of the things that they are saying that they're going to do and not do.
Are you aware?
So that is the director of the CIA saying that we can verify an agreement with Iran, and that's something that is supposed to come up by the end of this month, possibly this week. It was originally supposed to be March 24th, may be moved to March 31st, but there's supposed to be some agreement with Iran, and that was what the big speech from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was ostensibly about, warning us against making this deal with Iran. And anyway, that's the last clip I want to show on the whole topic of Israel, and I only have one more clip for the show before I finish up. This is also from CIA Director John Brennan. This one I thought was a little more disturbing. This was a really fawning interview from Chris Wallace. He gave 2 whole segments. Apparently there's more of it online that they didn't even broadcast, and they start off like in the entryway to the CIA headquarters and talk about the sacrifice and the triumphs that we never hear about, and it was really a very positive story about the CIA. And at the end they talk about the torture report, and basically in a way that I thought was trying too much to justify torture. Although John Brennan, the director of the CIA, he kind of tried to walk the line where he said he can't make that cause and effect link. They tortured some people and they got some information, and he didn't really answer the question, but he said we should be proud of the people in a way that I'm not sure I'm proud. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section after you watch that final clip here.
At a time when the Senate Intelligence Agency was investigating the enhanced interrogations that were carried out after 9/11. And one of the key issues was whether or not the agency exaggerated the effectiveness of EITs. Did enhanced interrogation play a role in our being able to track down Osama bin Laden?
I cannot determine cause and effect. That it was only for the use of those EITs that those individuals provided information. But the takedown of bin Laden at that compound was the result of tedious work that was done by counterterrorism experts that were able to tap into the information that was provided by individuals who were in detention and that CIA debriefed.
How badly did the criticism coming 12 years after 9/11 of what this agency did, a very different time, a very different place, how badly did that damage the morale of this agency?
It was demoralizing to a number of people, particularly those who were involved in the program, who really felt as though there was an effort on the part of some individuals involved in that investigation, that report, that were intentionally trying to, I think, just emphasize and overemphasize the mistakes that were made and did not put it into the proper context. Yes, mistakes were made, but the overwhelming activities that were a part of that program were ones that I think the American people would feel proud that the agency was able to fulfill its responsibilities.
Finally,
I don't know. I read the executive summary of that CIA report, and I covered it on a couple different shows a few months ago, and I'm not proud. I don't see. I mean, I guess there's a lot of stuff the CIA might have done that I will never find out, but it's hard to see how I would be proud. But anyway, I am proud of the clips I picked out for you for what I guess will be kind of a shorter show. I have to finish up here, but I appreciate all of you who joined me to. I think I got around 135 live viewers, and if you're watching this as a recorded show or live, I think actually either way you can support the show. I think, is it up in this corner or this corner? If you hover your mouse over there, even as a live show, there should be like a little eye there that should lead to either direct donations or becoming a patron on Patreon, or I don't know. Hopefully I will be able to monetize this show as a recorded show, even though I did talk about Islam somewhat, because I think it's talking about ISIS and putting ISIS in the title, or certain other keywords that I'm trying to figure out. But anyway, thanks for joining me. I'm going to continue to do this show for the foreseeable future. Next week it'll again be at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, Sunday, for the best clips from the Sunday morning shows, and then I guess it'll be the following week that I'll have to do my first Wednesday show on April 1st. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.